ne filerai pas. Fillette rencontre son amant, lui raconte son histoire. Marions-nous maintenant que j'ai fait consentir ma mère. L'amant pour la récompenser lui donne pour gage un doux baiser. Marions-nous, soyons heureux et tu fileras si tu veux. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Marie-moi donc, ma petite maman, je veux me mettre en ménage. Voyez-vous pas que j'arrive à 20 ans, je pense que c'est le bon âge. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si t'as 20 ans, je suis pas mariée, je vous le dis aux mères. Je voudrais que mon fouet serait réduit en cendres et en poussière. Et que ma quenouille sur les tisons, qu'elle soit réduite en cendres et en charbon. Toujours tourner, toujours filer, c'est un métier qui me fait ennuyer. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, non, je ne filerai pas. Ah, si vous ne me mariez pas, ah non, je ne filerai pas. Fillette rencontre son amant, lui raconte son histoire. Marions-nous maintenant que j'ai fait consentir ma mère. L'amant pour la récompenser lui donne pour gage un doux baiser. Marions-nous, soyons heureux et tu fileras si tu veux.
We would like to begin by acknowledging our Penobscot namesake. The Penobscots have inhabited Maine and surrounding areas for over 11,000 years. Their ancestral territory included many rivers that flow into the Gulf of Maine, including all the watersheds from the Machias River in the east to Cape Ann in Massachusetts. The Penobscot Nation is one of the oldest continuously operating governments in the world. The Penobscot Nation is part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, which also includes the Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet. Please join us in expressing our deepest respect to Penobscot leaders, past, present, and emerging, and gratitude to the Penobscot community for their enduring care and protection of the lands and waterways.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shepherd, Executive Director of Penobscot Theatre Company. I'm here with the final in our series of songs around Evangeline, otherwise called Evangeline. I am so excited to have you here with us tonight, and I'm extra excited to have the creator and the director of this wonderful, wonderful show. Before we get started, I just want to introduce John Siedenberg, who is making everything happen. He is our Titan Tech from Kentucky. And monitoring the Facebook chat tonight is Grace Livingston Kramer. If you have a question, you can put it there and Grace will relay it to us here in the Zoom room. I want to just make this little statement. This show, Evangeline, is about a loss of place, loss of people, and loss of a sense of self. We know that this explores people being displaced from their home, and we recognize that the loss of home is not exclusive to the Acadian people or the grand upheaval of 1755. Today, we are focusing our conversation on the creation of I Am Not Evangeline. So as I mentioned, with me tonight is the fantastic, the luminous, I might say, Carolyn Cook. She is the founder and artistic director of Theatre du Reve and the creator of this wonderful show. She studied French and theater in Paris and literature and linguistics at the Sorbonne. She worked all over Atlanta and still does. I don't mean to say it in the past tense. It will happen again. Georgia Shakespeare, Horizon Theater, the Alliance Theater, Actors Express, Theater in the Square. I could go on. Welcome, Carolyn Cook. How are you?
I was muted. Okay. Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
Bonne nuit, I should say. Bonne nuit.
Merci. Et à toi aussi.
And our second guest is none other than Lauren Morris, who is the director of the show and an artistic associate of Theatre du Reve. She studied theater at Indiana State University and received her MBA, MFA from Cal State, and is an artistic associate with Horizon Theater as well, and a company member of Indie Shakes, aka an Indianapolis Shakespearean Theater, right? Did I get that right, Lauren?
Shakespeare Company. Yeah.
Shakespeare Company, even better, even better. Hey, welcome.
Thank
you.
You're welcome. So listen, we started every talk back with food memories, and we asked the two of you to share some with us. And Carolyn, you shared sun-brewed mint tea and a bread recipe that looks simply amazing. Looked very easy. Yeah?
Yeah. I shared a couple of bread recipes. My mother made all our bread. So when I was growing up, we always had homemade bread. That's Lauren's persimmon pudding. And mother always made mint tea. There was always spearmint growing in the yard. And then this bread that's pictured there is a recipe that I found online, but that actually turns out to be not that hard for how amazing it looks and tastes. So that was pretty exciting for me. I make bread not as frequently as my mother did, but enough to quote unquote keep my hand in and to keep delicious sandwiches happening, especially in the summertime.
Exactly. And Lauren, you provided persimmon pudding, which I think a lot of people, don't believe I've ever eaten a persimmon, but I should.
Well, so eating persimmons themselves, they're little round fruits that come from a tree. And in the fall, they just fall from the tree onto the ground and you pick them up. And you can eat them. And in fact, this summer, I found them at the grocery store here in Atlanta. They were a different variety, but I've never seen them anyplace else really, except this thing that my family does every single Christmas. My grandmother would make it for my grandfather every single Christmas. It was his mom's recipe. And it's sort of a funny, I guess it's a little macabre, but that when he died, through her grief, one of the first things she said the day that he died was, "I'll never have to make persimmon pudding again." Oh. But you can see how well loved that recipe is. It's just that you have to use a food mill. And my mom gave me the one that belonged to my grandma. Yeah. To like get out all of the seeds. And so you can just have the pulp. So it's nice and smooth to make this. It's like a British style pudding kind of a thing. Like it's hard to explain, but it's delicious.
You might call it cake. Like sometimes I feel like British puddings is like sticky cake.
Yeah. Like a super moist cake.
Yeah, exactly. My mom just moved here and she found it's an accountant ledger, but that's where she keeps all of my mom's not an accountant. She's a potter. So I don't know why it's in there, but she keeps all of our family recipes in there. And so to find it after she didn't know where it was, and she found it in the move, which is odd, which brings us to the play very soon, but she found that book and making the recipes out of it all year long. So that was
that is sweet. I love finding the old family recipes.
Yeah, priceless.
Yeah.
So I know you just kind of gave 2 food memories, but do you have any others that come up to mind, especially us talking about our mothers like this and recipe books?
Mothers and grandmothers. I would say for me, I have very strong memories of one of my grandmothers making candied sweet potatoes for Thanksgiving. You know, sweet potatoes with like tons of brown sugar and butter. So good. So good. A lot of people in the South eat sweet potato pie, but we always had pumpkin pie, and then mincemeat pie, and then apple pie. We have a lot of pie for major holidays, and then but the candied yams, it was my grandmother's specialty. She made that and the pies.
That's cool. Yeah. How about you?
I just think the recipe thing brings to mind, my mom is trying to digitize, which is why I had that persimmon pudding recipe that looks like it got run over by a truck. She's scanning them all in so we can find them and share them. And they're just in our Google Photos. In case we ever lose that priceless book or recipe box, because you just don't want them to go away. I also think nobody in my family has figured out how to make Thanksgiving dressing, like turkey dressing, like my grandmother did. Like, it's just gone. It's too bad. I don't even think she ever wrote it down. She just did it. And it's one of those things that it's important to pay attention and get all the little details.
It's true. Interesting, because of course this just brings us right to the play. I feel like, of course, that's part of why we started there. You know, there is the scene, if you haven't seen it in the play yet, there's a scene where Carolyn actually is making bread in the show. And I remember when you started it, Carolyn, it brought back for me so many memories of sitting and watching my grandmother cook or bake, or sitting and watching my mother, who is still with us, so I can do it still. But I think we have a short clip that we'd like to show. Lauren, it's you just talking about the show. John, do you mind rolling the clip?
The elation that I felt knowing that we had caught that sort of lightning in a bottle on video, on film, was really beautiful. And I kind of understood in that moment, I understood one tiny piece of what it's like to make a film, because you can catch that lightning in a bottle. And with theater, you just have to experience the lightning. You don't get to catch it in a bottle. So that was a pretty profound realization for me.
None of us had seen that, so we're excited you read it. We haven't seen it. So let's start there. Let's start with what it was like to tackle this project, a film, which is a collaborative process, theater, which is a collaborative process, as you both know, in the middle of a pandemic. So can you tell me what it was? How did you go about it? What was it like? Who wants to start?
I'll let Carolyn start, because the seed of this began with her.
Okay.
I would say, first of all, that it's not a project of the moment, though most of the activity has been in the last 6 months. I have been in love with Maine and also Canada, Canadian music, traditional music, and New England traditional music for a number of years now. And so I had been going to Maine Fiddle Camp, and coming up from Georgia with bags and instrument cases and learning the fiddle tunes from Quebecois fiddlers, and then hearing Acadian fiddling, and then down east, and then, all of the different kinds of fiddling that exist in the region where you are located. And I loved it so much. And I thought, there's a story there. And I started with the idea of writing a play at some point called My Grandfather's Violin. and that Le Violon de mon grand-père, and that may still happen. Lauren and I and another colleague who is a fiddler went to a music festival in Montreal a couple of years ago called La Grande Rencontre, the Big Gathering, and listened to so much traditional music from all over the world, actually, but a lot of Canadian music and some New England music and some Breton French music and some music from the Basque country, and it was music from Western Canada. It was really amazing. And I interviewed some older folks there, and I just knew it was going to turn into a play. Well, it hasn't. And fortunately, this year with the pandemic, we realized that Theatre du Reve, which means Theater of the Dream, and was totally founded around my desire to act in French, my dream of combining these two passions that I have of French and theater. We realized we were going to have to do everything online, and it's our 25th anniversary year. And I thought, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. This year, we will explore at least 25 voices from all over the Francophone world. And so one of the parts of the Francophone world that we were looking at was North America. And so the obvious first thing to look at was Quebec. But as it turned out, we found so much to talk about in Louisiana and the Acadian region that we just really dug into that around November. And the whole time I've been thinking, Barry Newport was artistic director of a theater in Maine. I should connect with her about this idea that I have. And she found out about the work we were doing around Acadia, and she got in touch with me. And Jen, I just think that's the thing that made me feel that this was meant to be. It was time to dig in. It really didn't matter if I could play the fiddle well enough yet to write the other play. I needed to write something. And I started doing the research and discovered the story of Evangeline. I mean, I knew that poem existed, but I also knew it had been written by an English speaker, and so it wasn't a piece of Francophone literature. But when I found out about the relationship between the Acadian people and that poem, I knew we were onto something. And I had asked Lauren from the beginning, from 2 or 3 years ago, to collaborate with me on whatever we created. And so she's been along for the journey the whole time. So yeah.
I didn't know the part about, I remember you mentioning the play about the violin.
Uh-huh.
I guess I hadn't registered the other part. That's cool. I didn't know that part. I love it. All right.
So Lauren, I don't know what it was like for you to be along for that crazy ride, and then to have me.
I was called into the room, and then I met you on Zoom, and then Barry was like, she's going to write a play. And I was like, oh, great. And then
Okay.
I love the history. But at that point, I walked back into my office and was like, well, all right, I better start looking stuff up and just learning. But I knew about Acadians, and I knew about, I knew some of it, but it's been a dive since then into all of this. So, Lauren, how was it to make the film? Because you said at one point you were directing from a screen on a bookshelf. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I was. So it's funny because like Carolyn was saying, we had this idea and we knew that eventually it would become something. And it just so happened that this is what it needed to become because of the pandemic. And also because of the pandemic, we couldn't travel to locations and have a bunch of people on I know that there are film shoots that are doing that have all of the resources and budgets to test people and do all of those things. But we thought, you know what, we can do this at Carolyn's house and really limit the number of people and be really safe about it. And so I was not one of those people in the room. I tuned in via Zoom. They would put me sort of nearby to watch the scene being shot, or to rehearse for a little bit and talk to Carolyn. And then they would film it. And I would say, yeah, whatever notes I had about where we were shooting from and how it felt. And then they would hold up the camera to the Zoom and I would watch the scene and be like, yeah, that's it. It was actually surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
I just sat in this chair. I'd watched this screen for about 9 hours a day for a week or so. I don't know. It wasn't maybe a full week, which was fascinating also because I'm a theater director, y'all. I know a lot about theater. I know before this, I knew like nothing about film. So it was this parallel learning track because we were figuring out how to do this remotely in a pandemic and figuring out how to use these storytelling skills that we have for theater and turn them into storytelling skills for a screen. And of course, we've all been doing that a little bit this year because everything has been online. But it's very different, I think, than doing a Zoom play, because it really was a proper film.
Yeah. Which again, it's so funny when people tell you and then you see it, there's a difference because of course, when people tell you in your own head, you're making up what you think it's going to be. And then when you see it and you're like, oh, that's what they meant. Like, so, I remember you all mentioning Jennifer, who plays Evangeline, and I didn't get it. I was sort of like, okay, so like, we'll see her. Okay, great. So I didn't get that it was going to be such a parallel story. I knew the poem was a part of it because I was there at the reading, Carolyn, but that was kind of amazing to me. And that's cool. I didn't know you're the gentleman who directed the film, Chris, right? That's his name?
Chris was the cinematographer.
Right.
Chris Valeriano, who has a production company called Bush Dumping, he did all of the cinematography of the scenes that I was in. So he did all the cinematography here at the house, and it's basically all of the Eva cinematography. So the character, the contemporary character who's speaking to you throughout the film is Eva, and she was filmed by Chris. And then Josh Marsh, who is he's a film guy. He's Dr. Josh Marsh. He teaches film at Reinhardt University here in Georgia, and his PhD is actually in animation, but he teaches kind of all of it. Josh filmed all of the scenes of Evangeline. So we had two really wonderful and frankly very differently focused, a PhD film guy from a university department and a scrappy entrepreneur, both filming, and I thought that their work blended beautifully. I was really excited with how it all came together. But yeah, so that brings up the idea, the concept of the flashbacks or the different scenes. So like the film takes place in 3 different sort of time places. The current day in Georgia, where the character of Eva is packing up her house after a big life transition. Her memory of her childhood with her grandmothers, so different experiences with each of her 2 grandmothers in her own past, and then her deep knowledge of Longfellow's poem and scenes from the poem, or her imagined scenes from the poem. And that's the part, yeah, Jen, that was shot basically mostly outside, around places that were reminiscent of the locations in the poem. But with the pandemic, we couldn't fly to Acadia, so we did have to make do with places in Georgia.
Yeah. I think too, that's one thing about the film, and maybe you want to talk about this, that there is some theater magic in the film because the transformations, your mamère and your grand-mère are simply done with acting. Simply, you do have put on some glasses and an I guess, but it really is just what actors do, which is changing how we hold ourselves. So how did you discover those characters within you?
I think primarily by thinking of this as a theater piece, because that is what we knew. Lauren and I talked about this a lot. That is what we knew we would do if we were creating a play for the stage. And we would have a very simple set, and the different characters would all be played by one person, and she would transform by a position of her head or whatever, whatever it takes. And it can be the simplest thing, because audiences are brilliant. Audiences have great imaginations and will go with you if you give just the slightest direction. Say, we're going this way now. And you can do it with accent, you can do it with facial expression, you can do it with posture, you can do it with the rhythm of the speech. In this case, it's also done with language. We go into French, Acadian French for one character, and we go into a particular dialect for another. And it's absolutely paying tribute to the fact that we come from theater, and that we didn't want to go to an entirely different location and hire a different actor and et cetera, to get those flashback scenes. We wanted the sense of you're seeing Eva's memory. Mm-hmm. So the actor who plays Eva portrays that memory.
Lauren, you allowed that. I mean, I think it is a directorial choice to allow us to see her transform, which is the magic of actors.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that, again, we talked about a lot. Is this a play that we filmed? Is this a film? I think it more honestly is a play that we filmed and used some film sensibilities for, but I do think in its soul, it's still a play. Mm-hmm. But we had sort of all these extra tools that we could play with. And one of those is sort of watching that morph happen of her changing from one person into another, which I really love. And you would get to see if you were on stage too. So that is a really fascinating thing. And I'll be thinking about that for a long time and sort of unpacking what it is exactly that what pieces of which art forms we were using in those moments.
And Lauren, would you talk a little bit about the objects and the importance of the objects that took Eva back in time? Because I find that all the time around, if I pick up something from, sure. If I even pick up, this mug was my cousin's and she's no longer with us. And this is the one thing that I kept when we were cleaning out her apartment, and so if I pick this up, she's kind of here. And I just love the way that you as the director made those transitions connect to an object.
Well, sure. And I think that's a theater trick, right? That's a thing we do all the time in the theater to signal to the audience, oh, now I'm this person. I have this pair of glasses, or I have, this character uses this bowl. And I loved the way Chris was able to edit Eva's hands on the bowl that then became her grandmother's hands on the bowl. That's one of my favorite moments in the entire film. And I also think there's something really powerful about that. I think the reason we use it in theater is because as humans, our brains, as we're making memory, sort of grabs on to little things, whether it's a smell or these different senses that we use to put memories together. And I have such specific memories throughout my life that are sometimes the object doesn't even really make sense with the memory. It's one of those strange things that happens in our brains, those connections. But that's why I think it's really important. And also it was so cool because that was a bowl that did it belong to your grandmother or your mother?
No, it was my mother's bread bowl. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw my mother make bread in it weekly as a child. Yeah.
Which is so beautiful. And then the sewing box, though, was your grandmother.
That was my grandmother's, my mother's mother's. Yeah.
That's what one of my questions was. What in this piece is fact, or not fact, but closer to personal, and what is full fiction? For you made it up out of your imagination. So I guess right there, that kind of gets to it, the box. But I think there were maybe, I don't know, are there other elements of the play that are Carolyn, or you know?
It's a complete melange. Both of the grandmothers are composite characters based on not only things that I remember from my childhood, my grandmother who sewed, and then my mother who baked our bread, but also on oral histories that I listened to and people that I read about. And Lise Pelletier at the Acadian Archives at Fort Kent was tremendously helpful in helping me discover resources about Acadian life and Acadian history. And there are some, I think you had them on the last Salon in the chat. There were some videos of old Acadian recipes. And so, I watched some of those and I listened to those voices and to those dialects and looked at the food. And so the people that I wound up writing as the grandmothers, those voices came to me from a number of different sources, right? A lot of the things, not everything, but a lot of the things that Eva talks about experiencing during her life in Georgia are things that happened around me. I really do live in a refugee resettlement area. So the city of Clarkston, Georgia, which is where I live, it has been called the most diverse square mile in America. And my child really did go to school at a place where notes were sent home to the parents in 40 languages. And it just is remarkable. I find it remarkable. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the story of the Acadians really spoke to me, because I had friends when my child was growing up who were refugees from the Balkans, from Bosnia, from Myanmar, from Africa, from different parts of Africa, from the Congo and Sudan, Somalia. And when I've looked at news about Syrian refugees, for instance, that feels very close to home for me because it is literally close to home. So the things that happened to the Acadians seemed not that distant to me. Yes. And it was important to me to draw that parallel. The other thing is that here in Georgia, it's actually a long physical distance from the southern border of the United States. But in terms of the people who have settled here, it's not a long cultural distance. We have a lot of people here in our part of the world who have come here because there was work. Right. And they brought their language and they brought their customs. And that's exactly what has happened at the northern border of the United States, the northeastern border, at different periods in history. So I think that there are a lot of parallels, both in terms of the physical experience and the historical experience. I really did know from the very beginning, the first time I saw my husband, that we were meant for each other. And it really did take him 6 days to ask me out. But other than that, the story of Eva and her husband Bill is fiction. Sure. It's just the very deep love. Mm-hmm. And the ups and downs of a marriage, which she talks about, which are real. Mm-hmm. And the sense of freedom and excitement that comes when you get a fresh start in life, when the kids are grown and your career, you're ready to retire and it feels like a new chapter is beginning. I built all of that into the play based on my own experience. I've been married almost 39 years. So it's really a new chapter. I'm in a new chapter of life. And I did write a character who was in a new chapter of her life, but her new chapter is different from mine.
Yes, yeah. I think that's probably what makes the play so easy to access, is because it's very familiar to many people. Mm-hmm. And part of what is addressed in the play is the history of the Acadians, the grand upheaval of 1755. That's what the poem Evangeline is about. And I think it's interesting to me because it's Lise said last week that she didn't learn about that history until she was 36 years old, and she was a non-traditional student at the University of Moncton. And, right, so it blows your mind. And it also blows your mind that, like, I think Lauren, you made the point to me that this history it's not ancient, it's not in a museum because it's over, it's still with us and still stuff we must contend with and address. Do you want to speak to that? I know that was an important point of this play, to communicate that idea, to communicate to sort of, you go ahead, I'm going to shut up.
No, it's great. Well, I think, without writing an op-ed piece on what's happening in the world, a piece of art can tell a story that allows people to make connections for themselves. And I think that's really powerful. I think it's more powerful than an op-ed piece ultimately, because people are coming to realizations on their own, through their own lens, through their own stories. And ideally, a really wonderful play will allow you to sort of slip into the shoes and to see it from somebody else's point of view, but you get to be there with it. So when we're talking about the mistreatment of the Acadian people, the ethnic cleansing that went on during that time, I think it is really easy to think, oh, well, that was in the 1700s and look at their corsets, and wasn't that a long time ago? And that's simply not true. It's still happening. It's still happening all the time. And I think the sort of one level up from that, the very specific things, is just the idea of other, that we take a group of people, and whatever that quality is, whether it's what they look like, what they sound like, the food they make, the place they come from, all of those things, human beings, I for all of our existence have done that. Mm-hmm. That we set that group apart and say them over there and us over here, and it does not serve us. It's hard finding commonality. It's not like it's a simple thing to do, but I think it's important to me to make work that allows us to think about those bigger questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is the thing that has struck me about the play. I said it last week, is that all of us have experienced loss in one way or another. And so in that way, we are bound together by that experience. Yes. So, yeah, I think that's what the play, what it allows you to get in. It's like the perfect kind of metaphor, because, you can distance yourself just enough. And then suddenly at the end, you're like, oh, I'm weeping. Why am I weeping? Oh, because I've strongly identified, no, because this is so moving. And the poem also, if you listened last week, Juliana talked a lot about the Evangeline and what the poem means to the Acadian community. And I think what she said that it struck with me the most was that it's a symbol of hope. And I think that there's a lot of that in the play, the hope, even in the face of great loss, that Eva shows. Oh, you're muted, Carolyn. Somehow you got muted.
Well, that's because my cat came down here to this room. So I had to. He's gone now. I think she discovers hope over the course of the story. I think that's kind of the action of the play. I mean, is that she finds something that she did not know she had, by revisiting both this poem and her own childhood and her marriage and her own wanderings, because that's one of the things that Evangeline does. Is Evangeline, the character in Longfellow's poem, travels quite a bit. She's searching for her lost love, right? And and Eva too has traveled for career, for her husband's career, for her career. You know, she's lived in a number of different places, and she's realizing that she wants to make one last move. And I don't think at the beginning of the play that she knows why. I think that she has to go through the conversation that she's having with us, the audience, to make that discovery. And I don't even think that I knew exactly what that journey was completely, even after I had written the play. That is the beauty of having a truly trusted collaborator, because Lauren asked all the right questions. Who are you talking to? Why? What do you need from that person? What's going on? And it really, really helped me then as the performer to be able to find why. Why does Eva have to talk to you for an hour? Because she talks for an hour. So why? And I think it is to make that discovery of hope, Jen. I think it's to find what she what was right under her nose the whole time. There's no place like home.
Yeah, isn't that so how long have the two of you been collaborators?
How long have you lived in Atlanta, Lauren?
It'll be 10 years this fall.
We had the great good fortune to work together at a company that we both love dearly, Georgia Shakespeare, which closed in 2014, but I was lucky enough to be part of that company for 20 years, from 94 to 14, 15, right in there. And I guess it was 15, 16, somewhere in there.
15 when it
15.
closed, I think.
And then Lauren and I actually did not get to collaborate with each other for a few years. And we were reconnected through a project at Horizon Theater in Atlanta. And then I just asked her to come figure out a way to be part of Theatre du Reve. And she has been working on her French and really making Theatre du Reve part of her artistic tool belt or whatever. I don't know what to call it for you. I know that for me, I just have this sense of having a truly trusted collaborator, and it's magic.
Thank you. I think there are not very many places as an artist, as a freelance artist, which is what I am, that you get to go and somebody says to you, well, what shall we make? And I get to do that here. And that's really rare and wonderful. We collaborated on that Horizon project. I was stepping back into the theater after having a baby. And so that's why we hadn't worked together in the intervening time, because I was having a baby. And then I came back to the theater and slowly just sort of got reintroduced to the theater community here in Atlanta.
I would say our first big collaboration in terms of creating a piece was a play called Code Noir, Black Code, the adventures of the first Count of Monte Cristo. And that was a piece about Alex Dumas, who was the father of Alexandre Dumas, who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, who was himself the father of Alexandre Dumas' fils, who wrote La Dame aux Camélias, which is Camille. Right? Did I get that right? I got that right.
I think so.
Anyway, so Alex Dumas was actually a general in the French Revolution, and he was of French and African descent and was born in the colony of Saint-Domingue, which is now the country of Haiti. So a fascinating character. And Lauren and I collaborated with an actor named Tandiwe de Chazor and a stage manager, Mia Kristen Smith, and a fantastic group of collaborators to develop that piece. And we just loved it so much that we wanted to make another one. And it turned out to be this one. So here we are.
This so this brings us to, I did want to talk about Theatre du Reve. And so how does it, tell us about it? How does it work? You know, it says in your mission statement you're dedicated to bringing the French language and
francophone cultures
to the
the
state.
many cultures in the world where French is spoken. Yes, so we want to bring those to life on the American stage. That's the goal. We're certainly not averse to traveling and performing in Paris if invited, and we have. But our the mission was to present French language theater in Atlanta, Georgia, and around the Southeast, and then we've performed in Louisiana, Chicago, and in New England. Theatre du Reve, as I said, it means theater of the dream. It really was born out of a dream of performing in French, and I found, once you tell people your dream, Jen, they come out of the woodwork. I mean, I just found all of these people who had double majored in French and theater. Really, I was like, really? Yeah, okay. And just wonderful people right here in Atlanta, and people national, people who were really hot stuff. And we started with one play 25 years ago, and then we found an audience very quickly. We found that there was definitely a place for this in Atlanta. And then I didn't know that it was going to become a theater company, but the next season we produced another play, and then the next season, and then we incorporated, and then we became a 501c3, and then we were able to raise money. And it's consistently been important to me to pay our artists. So we are a professional company, and we produce once a year, usually. In the pandemic, we've done a lot more, frankly, than we would ordinarily do. But it was because all the theaters were closed, and it was an opportunity to stay in touch with our patrons, and to really commit to that Francophone exploration more deeply than we could by producing only once a year. So this year we've had the joy of exploring something that I had learned about 10 or 15 years ago, but hadn't been able to really dig into, which is the Negritude movement. Negritude, Blackness, which is an entire literary movement and philosophical and political movement born in Paris in the interwar years, when a whole lot of people from Africa and the Caribbean were studying in Paris and met each other and started really claiming their heritage as being of African descent. They were influenced by the Harlem Renaissance. So we did an entire salon called Harlem to Paris, where we talked about that. We did another salon about the Caribbean, the French-speaking Caribbean this year, and we have one coming up about modern West Africa. So we're featuring Senegal and Cameroon and the French heritage there, which is there for good or ill. It's a result of French colonialism, and French is still a major language in that region. And so people write and create and develop and have things to say in French in Africa. And our next salon on May 16th is all about that.
They're real fun. Go, everybody. Go to these salons. They're very fun.
Yeah.
Lauren, is it different to direct in two languages? Like, I feel like that's kind of a question on my part, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So would you find a difference, or, is there a difference?
Yes, particularly when one of the languages you are only just learning.
Right. It got me thinking about it, that you were just learning French. So
yeah.
Right.
I think because obviously once you are rehearsing a play, you know the script really well. And I know what the words are, even if I could not come up with them in my own brain and make them come out of my mouth. I understand a great deal. And I think that on some level, no, because you still have to just tell the story, and there's acting is still doing, and there's still an arc, and there's still, all of those things still exist. And in fact, I think it's a really fascinating thing that happens when people come see our shows. The play we made about Alex Dumas was in both English and French. And so, like this play, we had super titles above the play for both languages.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really fascinating is that, at least for me, and that was very early in my French learning, some sort of alchemy happens in your brain parts as you're watching it, and you start to really understand the subtext, which helps you understand the language. And as you're going along, you realize, actually, I know what they mean, even if I don't exactly understand the grammar structure or whatever. So I think that's a fascinating thing about these shows that we do. And we have a really robust student matinee schedule when we're able to do these things. So students who are learning French can come and watch them. So yeah, there's some differences, but I think the nuts and bolts are still the nuts and bolts of telling a story.
Yeah, of course. I mean, those things always are, the heart, the brain, all of those things still exist, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to chime in just for a second, as because I've directed for Theatre du Reve, but I've also, I've acted in a lot of the pieces, and from the very beginning, my experience has been that acting in my second language improved my language skills. So I highly recommend it if anybody is learning a language to, recite a poem, whatever, but to do a scene in that language requires you to be genuinely, to have an intention. It requires you to have an emotional attachment to that intention. It requires you to have a need from the other person that you're speaking to need a response. And it requires you to take that response in and then respond back, and so on. And so it was much, much more than a language exercise. It was a true experience of using the language to communicate based out of a real need. And then, big surprise, it improved my acting. Because I don't know, if you didn't fully embody and inhabit what was happening, you were going to lose the audience. And so really, really, really grounding our acting was essential, because in the early days, we did not have super titles.
Right.
We put a basic outline of the play in the program in English for people who didn't understand French, but otherwise they just came in and sat down and figured it out by seeing the genuine relationships between the people on stage. And that was the best acting challenge ever. So it's been great. It's been thrilling. I recommend it. If you speak Norwegian, if you want to learn it, do a play in Norwegian. I mean, I'm not kidding. So
just imagining Norwegian students being terrified to do a play, but you're right. They get there and it would help be a better actor. It makes total sense. So we're going to wrap up here. This has been such a great conversation, but I just have one last question, and both of you can answer it. And I guess, it's a little cliche, but I think it's a good question. What do you hope people will get from this play? What do you hope they'll take away? What do you want them to go home with at the end of the day? Who wants to go first? As you consider. Go ahead, Lauren or Carolyn. Who's going to go?
Carolyn's going, I think.
Okay, Carolyn.
The first thing that pops into my head, the first two words that pop into my head are words of advice that somebody gave me in looking at my own life and the world around me. And those words are curiosity and compassion. I think if we can enter into anybody's story with curiosity and compassion, we can grow, our relationships can grow. And that includes our own story. So I think that what Eva ultimately does is delve into her own life experience with some curiosity and discovers a capacity for compassion. And I think that whatever journey you're on as you watch the play, I hope you'll walk away with that.
Yeah, that's Good, really good, Carolyn. So good. And I think that's interesting. That's where the conversation ended in the first salon that I had with George,
Yeah.
Angela, is that they said, curiosity and compassion. It's like, it's where it's at. Lauren?
That is where it's at. And I do also hope that people come away with that. And then I also think there's, and maybe this is just because this is kind of a recent realization for me. What Carolyn said earlier, it's the Wizard of Oz advice that, you had it with you the whole time. And I think sort of making peace with our own history, our own place of origin, or all of those things, which are so complicated, but are in us for good or bad. There's no changing that, and embracing that in whatever way you can, and realizing that you bring it along with you, but you're also creating the next piece of your life all the time, and you get to choose that. So I think there's sort of the big picture global issues, and there's this sense of self, and wherever you go, there you are. That just popped into my head, but man, is that true?
Yeah.
It popped into my head, so I can't believe you just said it.
It's really true. I had a very wise therapist once say to me, Lauren, you're the protagonist in your story. It's you, actually. Like, you're not leaving this thing behind. You're not this huge loss that you just experienced.
Right.
That's actually not who you are.
Right. You don't need to wait for the protagonist. You are the protagonist.
Yeah. It's so cheesy, but it's really, that was a profound realization for me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Something that I'm taking away is gratitude, Jen Shepherd, gratitude to you and to Penobscot Theater, and to Barry for inviting us as a company, as Theatre du Reve, to explore with you and to bring what we found. I'm really grateful.
We are too. I'm so grateful. The pandemic has brought many things, as we all know, but one of them is some gifts in disguise. And this has been one of the wonderful collaborations and new friendships developed between, as Barry always says to me, sister theaters. I
hope we will remain sister theaters. That would be great.
You're right. There's now a connection between Atlanta or Clarkston and Bangor, Maine. So
the Appalachian Trail.
The Appalachian Trail. That's right. We're connected by a mountain range. You got it.
Right.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Carolyn. Thanks for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll just say in closing that Evangeline runs through May 9th. You can get tickets at penobscottheater.org or by calling our box office at 207-942-3333. If you are a teacher, and I understand there was a teacher watching this conversation tonight and asked if this would be available for your students, call me. I'm at the theater. Just call that number that I gave and ask for Jen. I'll talk to you. Thank you so much to John and to everyone else. It has been my honor to host these 3 talkbacks, and I hope you've enjoyed them. If you want to see them again, they're on Facebook or they're on YouTube on our Penobscot Theater Company channel. Good night, everybody.